Welcome to our webinar today, From Data to Decisions, Monitoring and Evaluation Basics for Library Leaders. Our speaker today is Dr. Sarah French. We are so fortunate to have her with us. She is a wealth of information, and I know you're really going to enjoy hearing everything that she shares today and her perspective. She is the KDLA data analyst and state data coordinator here for us at the Kentucky Department of for Libraries and Archives. We also, before Sarah gets started, we just wanted to give a thank you to LSTA for their sponsorship. KDLA is supported by the Library Sciences and Technology Act, and we thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services for sponsorship of this webinar. So I'm going to change over the slides now to Sarah's presentation, and we will get started. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, Tricia, and good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? I'll take silence as a yes. Okay, so we have a pretty manageable group here. I think we're good to just unmute when we want to discuss things, but if you feel more comfortable, feel free to drop it in the chat or something if there's something that you'd like to bring up. And I'll try to keep my chat open and keep an eye on that as we go through. So I'm really glad you're here. Like Tricia said, I'm from KDLA. I'm a data analyst here, and we're going to talk about my favorite thing today. So I'm excited to speak with you. I hope that by the end of this session, you feel genuinely equipped to use data. You don't need any statistics degree. You don't need to know what a regression is, but if you do, let's hang out. I just want to give you a practical framework that you can hopefully take right back to your library and use right away. So let's go ahead and get into it. Here's a little roadmap for what we'll be covering today. First, I will have a very brief why does this matter. I kind of start every topic ever with why does it matter, so we'll talk very briefly about that. Second, we'll move into how to ask the right questions when you're going into research on your libraries. Third, we'll talk a little bit about tracking attendance and trends and try to go beyond the head count, which you might be taking already, to find insights hiding in your participation data. Fourth, we're going to talk about gathering and using patron feedback, like designing surveys that produce actionable insight, surveys that people will actually fill out and give you useful answers. Finally, we will talk about turning all of this data that you're collecting into decisions, talking about that sort of full circle moment, because data that doesn't change anything is just sad and taking up space. By the end, you should have a practical framework that you can bring back to your library and put to work immediately. Okay, so first I just want to make this case for counting in the first place. I find that people who work in a sort of not-for-profit setting tend to know their community really well, and sometimes it's not necessarily instinctual to think about counting everything, because you have experience and insight that just happens every day that you've gathered over years. I'm certain that you do know your community very, very well. But the thing is, what was that?
It's okay, Sarah. It was just someone lost their mute.
Oh, okay. Right, so here's the thing. When you're talking to a grant committee or legislators, city council, a funder or something like that for why your branch needs more resources or more money, your experience and your instincts, which are completely valid, don't always compel those folks. So anecdotes can be really great for generating ideas, but data and trends that you can demonstrate in numbers really helps you win those kinds of arguments and resources in those settings. So monitoring and evaluation, which I'm just going to call M&E because that's a big mouthful. M&E helps you do three very specific things. First, it lets you demonstrate community impact with concrete evidence. It helps you make defensible decisions about which programs to grow, modify, or retire. And it replaces sort of, we've always done it this way with here's what the data says we ought to do. And that's a much more persuasive argument. So let's talk about what monitoring and evaluation actually looks like in practice. It has 4 steps in the M&E cycle, and those are plan, collect, analyze, and then act. We'll go through each of these steps. First, plan. This is when you define your questions up front and decide what success looks like for you before you collect any data. Second, once you have all that outlined, you can begin gathering your data using consistent and reliable methods. We will talk a little bit more about consistency in a moment. Once you have your good, reliable, consistent data, then you can analyze it and look for patterns, trends, and insights in that data that you've collected. Finally, you act. You need to make actual decisions based on that data that you've collected, adjust programs based on those findings. Most libraries, your library included, are probably already good at the collect step. Libraries are sort of constantly gathering data, passively or actively. But the magic is in sort of completing this loop. Data that you collect and never look at is just digital clutter taking up space on a survey somewhere, and it's making no one's life better. So I want everyone to kind of think of M&E less like an audit where you're just seeing what's going on. That sounds kind of terrible, and more like an ongoing conversation with your community where you're asking questions, then you're listening to the answers, you're making adjustments, and then asking again. So this is the basic theory behind what we're going to talk about today. Now we've got that basic theory down. I'm just going to take a breath and move into how you actually do this. I'm going to introduce this term that I use probably too much, which is a squishy question. And a squishy question can be a really valid question that you want to know the answer to, but it can be extremely difficult or impossible to answer. A really common M&E mistake is starting out with data that you think is cool or interesting instead of starting out with a question, or starting out with a question, but it's super squishy, meaning it's super vague. It's not very well defined, and the data for that kind of question will be vague too. So an example of a question that has too much squish is like, do people like our new makerspace? What does that mean? What does it mean to like the new makerspace? And who are people? So an operationalized version of this, where we get more specific and more answerable, we might say something like, how has the introduction of the makerspace affected the number of new library card registrations among residents aged 12 to 18? The second question is a much better one for getting actual answers because it defines who you're measuring, residents aged 12 to 18, what success looks like, that's new library card registrations or liking, and how you count it as those new library card registrations. Because this is so well defined, a stranger could come collect that data for you. If you can't operationally define the question yet, then you should refine it before you begin collecting any data. And that's the test. If you can't write down your question clearly enough that an absolute stranger could walk into the library and collect the data, then you should go back and sharpen the question. So before we move on, I want to do just a quick example exercise here. I'll show you a couple research questions that are a little bit squishy. And I want you to just think about how they're vague and what you might do to operationalize these, to turn them into specific answerable questions. And we'll just take like a minute, 2 minutes maybe to think about these. Okay, I'll give you some hints. Oh, yes. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, what do we mean by benefits? Yes, exactly. We need to more narrowly define pretty much every word there. What is community? Who is that in this question? How will we define a benefit? How will we measure it? Okay, so we can think about these things. You guys have already mentioned several of these, but for the first one, we might ask, what does benefiting mean? Yes, yeah, that's great, Sarah. Yes, very first of all, what does underserved mean? How do we define that? And here are some, just one, several of many, many ways you could define underserved based on income, geography, age, disability status, internet access. So you really need to spend time thinking deeply about what do you mean by that? How does that make an impact in your community? What kind of community do you work in? And what sort of underserved populations might be there? And similarly, we're saying benefiting, we're saying reaching, and these are great words, but we don't know what they mean in a research context. So we need to decide that. And there's no right answer, but we do need to be specific so that people understood what it was we were trying to figure out and how we measured it. In this case, we might define benefiting as learning a skill, and getting a job, an employment outcome, or a feeling of social connection. And these are all things that we could measure quantitatively or qualitatively if we were clever about it. Which parts of the community do we want to study? We need to kind of narrow that down as well. How would we measure the benefit after we've defined it, and over what time frame? And these are questions that are going to be relevant for any research situation that you find yourself in. You'll still need to define these things. Similarly, for this, are we reaching underserved populations? How is underserved defined? What does reaching mean? Attendance, awareness, registrations. What services or programs are you going to evaluate specifically? And what benchmark determines success? So you want to think about, what does a successful outcome look like for us, and how will we measure if we've achieved it? Okay, I want to move to a couple of concepts that are super important in any research question, and those are validity and reliability. If you haven't heard these terms in a research context, have no fear. They are just common sense, really, and lovely language. So validity means accuracy, pretty much. Are you measuring what you think you're measuring, what it is that you want to measure? And a classic trap would be sending an online-only survey to measure community interest in digital literacy, right? So you're automatically excluding everyone who isn't already comfortable online. So you're not really measuring what you wanted to measure, because that might be the exact population you were trying to reach. So that's a validity problem. Your instrument and your method is not matching your goal or your target. Next is reliability, which is synonymous in this case with consistency. Would you get the same result if you did the exact same thing again next month? So asking your staff to estimate Wi-Fi users is unreliable, but pulling a standardized router traffic report every day at the same time is reliable. It's going to be the same method every time without sort of subjective intervention. So at the bottom of my slide here, these are the 3 things that we need to check on before we move forward with any data collection. Ask yourself these 3 questions. Have I defined my terms so clearly that a stranger could come into the library and collect this for me? Is it valid? Does this data actually represent the problem I'm trying to solve? And is it reliable? Would this process stay consistent if I repeated it? Now, the results don't have to stay consistent. Sometimes you're looking for the results to change, right? But your process needs to stay the same for differences in results to be meaningful. So I'm going to do another quick little practice session here, just identifying issues with research scenarios that I'd made up, but I think they sound at least somewhat realistic. So I want you to think about this research scenario, this research design, and ask yourself if there is an issue here. And if there is an issue, is it an issue of validity measuring what you want to measure? Is it an issue with reliability? Is that actually going to be a consistent process? Or is it both? I'll give you just a brief moment to look this over and think about that. Thank you, Tricia. Okay, so a couple of our answers in the chat mentioned validity, and I completely agree. This is a validity problem. And as was also alluded to in the chat, overall visits can be influenced by lots of things. It might not necessarily be because of the quiet study zone, right? It could be seasonal usage. There might be a new bestseller released, expanded programming, school exam periods, even the weather, if it was super rainy that week or something like that. Increased foot traffic might mean that patrons like the quiet study area specifically, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And we'll need to be more specific if we want to make a compelling argument that that is what happened. Okay, let's try another one. In this one, the research design is that facilitators are asked to report how many participants were actively engaged during workshops. Some count verbal participation only, while others include note-taking, attentive listening, or small group discussion. Maybe I should have made these harder, but yes, I agree. It's a reliability problem. And that's exactly right. Define actively. Every person had their own way of measuring because they started out without a clear definition. So different facilitators were interpreting the same participant behavior differently, and that made our measure unreliable from session to session. So a fix for this would be to sit down before you begin this data collection and really define what that means. Down to writing down exact behaviors that will be counted and behaviors that will not be counted. And it's best to have a few people involved in this so that you can get different perspectives. But if you can have a small team at your library, define your construct, how you're going to measure it, and move into that with an agreed upon framework, you will get much better data and you can actually interpret what you've seen. Okay, and here's our last one. I'm sure you'll be able to figure out the problem very quickly, but a library measures awareness of services by asking patrons entering the building whether they know about the library's online tutoring resources. Is this a validity problem, a reliability problem, or both? Would you say more about who they're asking might be a problem, if you are comfortable? So again, of course, I agree with you. It's a both problem. I see it as a validity issue because current library visitors, the ones who are walking in the door, might not be representative of the broader community, especially people who aren't aware of services because they don't come to the library. It's also a reliability issue because staff members might be asking the question differently. Maybe they'll explain the service even before the patron answers, and they might be influencing responses that way. But the answers in the chat are an excellent demonstration of why it's important to talk to other people about what you're measuring and how, because I wouldn't have thought about this. Especially this comment here about the little grandmother versus the high schooler. So the high schooler, at least arguably, would be more likely to know about tutoring services because that's relevant to a high schooler. And maybe the little grandmother who is not in school anymore wouldn't be aware of something like that. So thinking about your audience is really important. Who do you need to ask to answer this question? Most of the time, you don't need to blanket all of your patrons with a question. You're trying to talk to a subset of your patrons. So think about who that might be. Okay, thank you guys for playing along. All right, we'll talk about some common ways that libraries collect data already. And you may or may not do this, but tracking attendance tends to be the foundation, as I've found. I might not have mentioned, but I'm relatively new to the library world, so I'm always learning how things are done. But one thing that definitely sticks out when I'm looking through data from libraries is that tracking attendance and foot traffic, program attendance and foot traffic, seem to be really big, important metrics, which makes a lot of sense. So attendance a lot of times will be your baseline for program evaluation, and everything else will be built upon that. But raw head counts only tell you so much. That tells you who walked in, but it doesn't tell you much else. So some tips for kind of moving beyond that. This is another thing I'm learning a lot about is ILS. And I recently went to a conference that was focused on like library tech. And I was blown away by the features of ILS. They can do so many things. Anyway, a lot of modern integrated library systems can link your event attendance to patron records for anonymized demographic analysis. So if yours can do that kind of thing, you can learn a lot. You may already be paying for capabilities that you're not aware of. So, talking to your representative from your ILS company is maybe a good idea if you don't feel like you're utilizing it fully. Second, gate counters versus program counts. This is something that I deal with in my capacity as the state data coordinator here at KDLA. It can be a little tricky tracking program attendance via a gate counter because someone, walking in the door to use the restroom or something isn't a participant in story time, right? So mixing the two together is what's called a data hygiene issue. And when we mix those two together, it muddies everything that we want to know downstream. So keeping clean records, keeping separate clean records of foot traffic and program participation is really critical, especially for those of you who are interested in doing program evaluation. Third, I recommend requiring registration even for free events because no-show rates tell you something really, really important. When people are registering for something and not showing up, it helps you understand that you have an engagement problem rather than a demand problem. And you might have personal experience with these things. So a demand problem is when you're offering programs that people are not interested in. But an engagement problem is when you are offering interesting programs, but people for some reason are not coming. So when you require registration for a free event, it lets you gauge interest even if you're seeing a lack of engagement. And they have different solutions. So it can be very helpful to know which one is getting in the way of your programming, being successful. Okay, now I want to talk about trends, because trends are more important than single data points. Pretty much always a single attendance number means virtually nothing in isolation. If you have one packed event, it doesn't prove that you have demand for that, and one empty workshop doesn't mean that you don't. It could be for lots of other reasons. So looking for patterns over time will be a lot more insightful. And there are 3 lenses that are particularly useful to look through when you're considering this kind of thing. The first is called audience segmentation. This is basically when you just break down your attendance by age bracket, which you do already for the annual report, but you can break it down by other things as well, depending on your interest, things like neighborhood. This is going to help you understand who you are reaching and who you are not reaching. If there's like a whole quadrant of your service area that never shows up to anything, that's worth investigating in itself. Next, you'll want to consider seasonal dynamics. Look at how attendance is correlating with things like school calendars, local weather, local events, and you can sort of see over time how to program with the rhythm of your community, meeting demand during more open times, say in the school year on breaks and things like that. You can also understand why low turnout might be happening by looking at what's going on in the broader community. It's not always because of something you did. Sometimes it's something that's going on out in the world around you. And finally, topic categories, and using these really consistently, using the same categories consistently over time. Tag your programs like health and wellness, financial literacy, makerspace. I'm sure you probably do this, but keeping those tags consistent over time can be a problem. So have a master document that all of the staff have access to that lets them know which tags to use when, and to always tag programming. When you tag consistently and you start to build up data over time of consistent tags, then you see which subjects pull people in. You can even tag, presenters. You can see who's a popular presenter and where the gaps are. What's maybe not performing quite as well. So if you look just at attendance, I hope that you see the point now that you're basically just looking at your library through a tiny keyhole, and you really need to pull back a little bit to see what's going on. Okay, so for data collection, I don't care very much about specific software. I'm a firm believer that you don't need any fancy software to do good monitoring and evaluation. You already have the tools that you need, more than likely, and the best tools are the ones that you and your staff will use. So ones that you probably already have access to that matter more in your consistent use than getting anything new. Here's the toolkit that I would recommend, and that's some sort of event management software. Anything really that handles registration, automated reminders, and offers that no-show tracking, which can be really insightful, as I mentioned. If you're doing this right now, if you're doing it manually in spreadsheets, I just want you to know that life gets better than that, and you don't necessarily need to do that. Next is, I think interest and outcome surveys are incredibly useful, but they are most useful when they're standardized, meaning you keep the same sort of format all the time. This allows you to compare across programs and compare across time points in a way that you can't if you're making up a new survey every time. So it's a very good idea to develop a sort of boilerplate survey, an interest survey, and then maybe a boilerplate outcome survey, or a pre and post. Keep that on hand where you can pretty easily swap out program-specific information into that boilerplate language and use that consistently. Okay, next is local context data, and that's going to help with what we just talked about what's going on in your local area and understanding that. This is all freely available information that you can get online mostly, like school calendars and census demographics, community event schedules, etc. And these can provide a lot of insight into when you might want to increase your programming or why something didn't perform very well. And last, again, it's worth noting again, your ILS. Are you using it to the fullest extent that you can be using it? You know, they're typically expensive. You're paying for something, and hopefully you are getting your money's worth. So it's worth a conversation with your vendor if you're not sure. Some of them have really fantastic analytical capabilities programmed in as well. So. Okay, next, let's talk about my favorite thing, that's surveys. I love surveys. And also, if you ever need help designing a survey, you know where to find me. Patron feedback is most commonly gotten either directly when they say something to you spontaneously while you are at work or via a survey. But surveys are easy to do badly. Badly designed surveys are worse than no survey at all because they give you false confidence in data that isn't actually telling you anything, and it gives your patrons survey fatigue. And then they're less likely to fill out your good survey when you develop one. So I want to just give you these 5 very basic principles for survey design that will help prevent you from collecting useless data that makes me sad. The first one is to avoid any leading questions. So don't say things like, how much did you enjoy today's program? They didn't say they enjoyed it. Don't imply that they did. Use neutral language and say something like, how would you rate today's program? But actually, that's not that great of an example. It should probably be more specific. But how would you rate today's program is better than how much did you enjoy it? You need neutral wording. Second, 1 idea per question. Don't ask, was the program useful and easy to understand? That's something that we call a double-barreled question. It's 2 questions smashed into one, and it makes it impossible to answer for someone who found it useful but confusing, right? So anytime you see something like that in your surveys, break it into 2 questions. Number 3, use consistent scales. I've been talking a lot about consistency, and that's because it is probably the #1 thing to keep in mind if you want to see data over time. And that's the most insightful way to look at it, is to look at it over time. You can't do that if you haven't been consistently collecting it. So pick a scale and stick with it across all your programs. If you use a Likert type scale of rating something 1 to 5, if you use that today and 1 to 10 next month, then you can no longer compare this month to next month. So stick with the scale that you've chosen. 4, keep it short. Response rates do drop off a cliff after 5 to 7 minutes. So you want to respect people's time, and you'll get more and better data. Most of the time, what you want to know can definitely be collected in 7 minutes or less. And lastly, pilot it first. Even if it seems really straightforward and really clear to you, just ask a few colleagues to take your survey before you send it out, because people get confused about things you might not expect. It saves a lot of pain and takes very little time. Okay, moving on. Now I want to talk about exactly what we measure, because sometimes we are measuring things that feel good but are maybe not actually all that useful. A really big difference in the usefulness of your survey is not asking if people liked something. I say stop asking if they liked it, because if they liked it or not is not really interesting in the end. Start asking instead if something changed. So satisfaction data, did you enjoy the program? Like I said, it's boring really, and if you shift to impact and change metrics that measure effects of what you're doing, that's much more compelling. So some satisfaction questions would be like, did you like the craft? Was the presenter engaging? And that's all well and good, but it doesn't really tell you a lot that you couldn't just see by looking at people in the program. Impact questions are more like, did you learn a new skill today? How confident do you feel using the skill on your own? This lets you look for measurable changes in knowledge and confidence in behavior and intent, and that makes a compelling case for continued investment to your board, your funders, and your community. This is funders in particular are much more interested in hearing something like 72% of participants reported a new skill than they are in, like people said that they had a nice time. The first one is much more likely to get attention in a grant. So that's why I think, although it's nice to hear people liked it, it's not always the most compelling or persuasive thing. Okay. So not every situation calls for the exact same type of feedback collection, so you need to match the tool to the moment. And I want to talk about just a few tools that you will probably want to use. First is the point of service survey. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's a very short survey, maybe 3 to 5 questions, that it's at the exit of your program or whatever you'd like to measure. It's a sort of high volume, immediate sentiment thing. People are very likely to fill it out because you're right there asking them to do it in person. It's less, it's harder to ignore than a link in an email or something like that. And it's really great for just a quick read on a new program while people still have the experience fresh in their minds. Next is what we call a longer form outcome survey. You can send this after the event via email, and this is going to capture more profound effects, reflection and behavior change, talking about like those things about if you're confident in the skill that you've learned. Give that 24 to 48 hours so the experience has time to sink in, and you can measure what really stuck out, what they really remember after some time has passed. And finally, qualitative focus groups. Qualitative just means it's not quantitative, it's not number-based, it's more based on what people are saying, more verbal feedback. So once a year or more, if you can, bring in your super users, the people, your library lovers, people who are always there, for moderated conversation. But if you can, and I strongly encourage you to try to find a way to bring in non-users, because people who aren't coming to your library have excellent insight into why they're not coming to your library, right? So they're telling you something really important. And if you can get them in the room and you can listen to what they have to say, you stand to gain quite a bit. Finally, just mix your methods. Quantitative data, a lot of what I've been talking about has been data on numbers, how many people did this, how many people did that, for how long. And qualitative data is what I mentioned, is that more verbal feedback, that more conversational, think about like an interview instead of a survey. So quantitative data can tell you what's going on, and that qualitative data can tell you why that's happening, and they complement each other. So you can look at your qualitative data to get ideas about what you might want to measure with numbers, and you can look at your quantitative data to see what you might need to explore by talking to people. It's good to have both. So speaking of qualitative data, I want to just defend the humble quote for a moment, because I know numbers feel more impressive to me because of the kind of data person that I am, and words can feel kind of squishy, but they also can say something that numbers cannot say, which is why we need both. So numbers are clean, they're easy to present, but if someone says to you that after a program that you've just worked hard on, that was the first time they ever felt like the library was for them, or the first time that they understood that the library does all these diverse things, that tells a story that no chart could tell. So best practices for collecting qualitative data is to use consistent prompts, ask the same question the same way whenever you're talking to a patron, so that responses are comparable across programs and across time periods. Then look for themes in those responses. And there are certain ways that you can go about this I'm happy to talk more about, but you want to kind of read, not for specific words, but for general sentiments behind what people are saying, and see what themes you can identify coming up over and over again. Also include critical feedback. Don't just look at your positive quotes, or don't just share your positive quotes, because that kind of undermines your credibility, and it also tells a disingenuous story about what's going on at the library. So you want to include those critical pieces of feedback as well. And lastly, like I said before, mixing those methods and pairing quotes with quantitative data can really up your impact. Alrighty, let's talk just a little bit about basic analysis. Nothing too crazy. Like I said at the very beginning, you do not need to be a statistician, and you don't even need to be particularly good at math. I know that analysis can make people nervous sometimes. In my, I asked people to fill out a survey before this webinar, and one of the things that stuck out to me was I had asked whether people felt confident in interpreting data and analyzing it and drawing meaningful conclusions. And most of my respondents do not feel very confident in that, but I'm here to tell you you can absolutely do it. You are smart and capable, and none of this is beyond the skills that you already have. So I'll talk just about a few very basic analyses that everyone is capable of doing. Counts and totals, you already collect that, I'm sure. How many people attended the program? How many people completed the survey? Those are your basics. Next, looking at averages, looking at mean satisfaction scores, mean scores for whether people feel confident with their new skill, the average attendance per session, looking at that over time. Now, the average isn't going to be very helpful when you're looking at a single event, but the average over time tells a great story. So look at that, and just keep in mind that there are different metrics that are appropriate for different times. What's appropriate for this particular question is not always appropriate for another question. Next, looking at percentages. What share of respondents reported a knowledge gain? Percentages translate well to any audience. Everybody understands them for the most part, and they can be very compelling. Lastly, trend lines, looking at stuff over time. Is attendance growing? Is it flat? Is it declining over 3 years? The direction is more important than how much it's shifting. Just look over time and see, is it generally going up? Is it generally going down? What's happening there? And a huge important question for any kind of data and any kind of question is compared to what? So just set your baseline. What are you comparing this to determine whether it's a meaningful change? A single number is a fact and can be great, but a number compared to a benchmark is insightful. Okie dokie, let's talk about visualization. Visualization is something that will be very helpful for you when you're talking to stakeholders and funders. The most important thing that I would highlight would be that it needs to be easy to read. A good, impactful figure is simple. You can make sense of it in maybe 10 seconds. It shouldn't take a lot of staring at to understand what's going on. So visualize clearly so that your points land. Bar charts, most people are familiar with them. They're very good for showing comparisons. If you want to show attendance by program type or participation across your branches, if you want to highlight changes based on category, a bar chart is a great way to do that, and pretty simple to do with tools that you already have like Excel and probably your ILS. Line graphs are better for looking at trends over time, so we're not looking at categories of different things. We're mostly looking at the same thing over and over again, like attendance, year-over-year growth of a program, things like that. And finally, one big number. And that's when you want something to land really hard. Like when we said 72% of people earned a new skill, that's something that you want to put big and bold, front and center when you're communicating. Avoid chart clutter. Like I said, if someone has to study it for a really long time, it needs to be redesigned, and use pie charts sparingly. This is kind of a personal problem I have with pie charts. Just please only bake a pie when parts of a whole is really the point that you want to make. Otherwise, it just sort of sits there and confuses everybody. All right. Now this is where we close the loop when we're talking about the M&E cycle. You have planned, you've operationalized your question, you've collected your data, and you've done the analysis, and now you need to do something with it. So there are 3 concrete examples of what this might look like that I'm going to give to you here, but you will think of many others on your own, how you will use your findings to drive real decisions in your library. The first I think about quite a bit is the sunset rule, because our contexts are constantly changing, and your patron needs and desires are constantly changing over time. So I think the sunset rule is a very good place to start. If you see 3 consecutive years, and you can set a different timeline for that if you have reason to maybe stretch it out, maybe say 5 years or something like that. 3 consecutive years, though, for example, of declining engagement. And there's also low impact scores that maybe you see, from surveys that you've conducted. That translates to objective evidence to retire the program and redirect your resources, and you don't have to feel guilty about it because the data backs you up. Next, the data that you've collected and analyzed can help you with your resource allocation. You can have something like 60% of your attendance coming from 20% of your programs. And now that's very clear data to justify hiring part-time staff during the times that those programs are occurring, maybe during the weekends. And finally, grant justification. So the vibes are good at the library, but funders don't fund vibes. So robust M&E data showing measurable community impact will make you a lot more competitive in front of grant committees. So yes, just having this stuff ready to go and show to funders will be of great use to you. Now, there are just a few sort of watch outs that I want to cover, things that trip people up, even after you get started with a solid M&E practice. The mistakes of many of my colleagues and myself hopefully will help you now. So collecting data that you never analyze, this is a problem I personally have, as I have sort of a data acquisition problem. And there's, sometimes I'm collecting data and I know full well I'm never going to look at it. But without analysis, it's just digital clutter and it's a waste of your time. So try not to do that. Next is changing methods midstream. So this disrupts your consistency, which is super important. Remember, you're losing the ability to compare. I like to say consistency is more valuable than perfection. So even if you realize after you've started data collection, you realize that maybe that wasn't the best way to do it, stick with it for the cycle, finish it out. You can make adjustments later, but finish it out so that you still have something to show for the work that you've done. Measuring outputs instead of outcomes. We held 40 programs as an output. Sometimes that's useful information, but 72% of participants reported gaining a new skill is an outcome, and it's a little bit more impressive. Next is surveying only the happy people. This isn't always your fault. Happy people are more likely to answer the survey. So you have to put in the extra effort to actually reach patrons who aren't already big library superfans. Thinking about how you can make data collection accessible to everyone and how you can encourage those respondents will be an important task for you. And finally, waiting until the grant deadline or the annual report deadline to find your data. Building the habit now is a very good thing to do. Scrambling at the last minute leads to weak grant applications, missed opportunities, confusion around the annual report and what goes where, and so on and so on. It's a good habit to develop. Okay, and the last thing that I would like to talk about is sustainability in the library. So M&E only works if you do it consistently, right? And it's a team practice. It's not the director's side project. It shouldn't just be one person in the library who has to do all of it. If it lives in one person's head, then it just dies when that person goes on vacation or retires or gets a better job offer, etc. So to avoid having your M&E practices just fall apart when things change around the library, train all your staff, everyone that could potentially have any part in the M&E cycle. Teach them the tools and the data entry standards so that collection's consistent across all of your programs and across all your branches. Share your findings openly. Let staff see how their work is making an impact. That helps them understand why you're doing this anyway. And it kind of like builds a sort of buy-in mentality. This is something cool that we do together that makes sense and see, we see results from. Celebrate your data wins. When you see something like your teen attendance is up 34%, make a big deal out of it. It's a super good reason to celebrate. And it highlights why you do all of this data collection in the first place. It's not just a reporting burden. It's something that lets you know when you have real tangible successes. Build M&E into your regular meetings. You can weave M&E check-ins, data check-ins in staff meetings rather than just annual reports. Frequency builds fluency. And finally, start small. Just one program, just one question, just one cycle. You don't need to start measuring everything in the whole place right away. Just getting started is the most important thing. Pick your pet program. Think about what you would want to know most of all about that program, and then develop your question about it. Figure out what the best tool to answer that question is and get started. So here's just a little overview of our key takeaways and what I hope that you can take back to your library. First, anytime you're starting an M&E practice, start with a really good question. Define your terms before you collect anything. Check your validity and reliability. Is it measuring what you want it to measure? And is it measuring consistently? Trends beat raw numbers. If you can get that consistency down, then that will give you the power to track things over time. Context and comparison are critical. So that all helps you measure impact. Did they learn something? Beats, did they like it every time? Close the loop. Data that doesn't inform a decision is wasted potential, and it's sad. And consistency over perfection. You don't need perfect systems. You need systems that you use consistently and that your staff knows how to use. Alrighty, that is all I have for content. We do have a little bit of time for discussion or questions, and I would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. While people are thinking and putting their thoughts together, I wondered if you could go back to the very beginning when you talked about the squishy question, because I was curious if anybody at the very beginning was thinking, I wonder if this is a squishy question. So I just kind of wanted to open that up to the group as a thought for you guys, this one right here. Is there something that you think you're measuring right now, but when you heard Sarah start talking about this, you wondered, am I wording that effectively, or is that a squishy question? So that's just a thought for the group, in addition to everything else you're thinking about at the conclusion of the webinar.
Yeah, this could be a great opportunity to receive feedback if you want to workshop a question that you actually have in the real world right now. Sure. So demand versus engagement problems. I'm just going to go to that slide real quick, but we can go back to squishy in a sec. So here, right under number 3, where I'm making the case to require registration even for free events, is because if you require registration and you're not just interested in how many people showed up, you want to know how many people intended to show up but didn't. Because a demand problem is when you don't actually have demand for a program that you keep offering. You're offering a program, but people are not interested in it. That's a demand problem. An engagement problem, on the other hand, is when you're offering a program that people are interested in, but for some reason or another, and we don't know unless we try to do research to find out, they're not showing up. When you have no-show rates that you're able to look at, you can tell that it's not a demand problem, it's an engagement problem. If you see that people are, consistently registering for an event, but they're not coming, that lets you know that you need to figure out what are the obstacles to them showing up. Whereas if you have an event and people just aren't registering at all, that lets you know that there's not really very much demand for that event. Does that make it more clear? Okay, good. Yeah, you might find out some interesting things about why people are not showing up to events. Or you might want to know, okay, I had a lot of people register for this, but then they didn't show up. There was some, I'm not sure what slide it's on, but when you can, oh, it's right here on the next one, how convenient. So you can look at seasonal dynamics maybe, and you might be able to answer your own question by seeing what was going on in your local area at that time, and it might give you some insight into why people who intended to come did not come after all. Okay, so back to squishy questions. And to be clear, most good research questions start out super squishy. You're wondering something. about what's going on in the library. That's okay. That's how good questions start. It's just your job to take that squishy question and kind of beat it into shape until it's really well defined.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate all the content that you've shared with us today. And I wanted to remind everyone that the slides are available under the PDFs and slides folder in Blackboard Learn. As well, the webinar today has been recorded and it will be available on our YouTube page as well as on our archived webinars page and in the online learning portal as a future archived webinar. And for everyone who attended today's live recording of the webinar, your certificate of attendance will be available in the online learning portal in the next week or so. As well, it will appear on your transcript in the portal. If you have questions for Sarah in the future, I know she's very warm and welcoming and happy to answer any questions that you have. She's pulling up her slide with her contact information here at KDLA. She is a wealth of information, and we're so fortunate to have her with us. So thank you again, Sarah, and thank you everyone who attended.
Thank you, everyone. It was good to talk with you.